Want to get creeped out? We're going to talk about real vampires, the ones that are terrifying, the ones from myth, and how they might have really existed or could still exist. Y'all have heard me talk about real vampires in length, specifically modern day vampires, which are similar to your modern day witch. We've got psychic vampires, energy vampires, sanguinarians, the ones who drink blood. But today, we're going to talk about real vampires, the ones from legend. And if you're asking or wondering if this topic was inspired by the most recent Nosferatu movie, you would be correct. Holy shit, that movie was terrifying and amazing. My new favorite horror movie. Let's start with some historical accounts of vampires near Cincinnati that are really weird. And these were written in articles in the paper. This story is particularly from a newspaper in West Virginia. A young man was discovering small puncture wounds on his arm while staying in a room at one of the most respectable boarding houses. As the weeks passed, he grew weak, he grew pale from assumed loss of blood during the night. He even asked a friend to stay over one night and watch him while he slept to see what was happening. But the friend wound up bailing after accidentally falling asleep and then waking up to puncture wounds of his own. He had one job. After a while, the young man decided to leave the boarding house. The old superstition of vampires was living rent-free in his head, so he left the house and went to a different part of the city. Strangely enough, him moving to a different part of the city did help. There were no more puncture wounds, and he quickly regained his health. This article caused several other people to come forward and state that they also woke up with mysterious puncture wounds in the very same room the young man had stayed in. March 22nd of 1879, the Inquirer shared a story of someone who had encountered a vampire. The man's name was William Wilson. He was a postmaster in Yellow Springs, and he claimed that he encountered a vampire in 1859. He was traveling home when he came across a mysterious figure in a village named Old Town. He saw in the path before him a fearful-looking object with a form like that of a man. Its arms and feet were naked, and the nails upon them were very long and uncouth, and appeared to be stained with blood. William described this person as repulsive looking, but initially thought it was a hunter. However, the figure followed William home to his stable on the southern outskirts of Yellow Springs. Here, the figure told him that he was a spirit of a boy who had passed away when he was 14 years old after going on a blood-sucking rampage. The figure told William, "I at first killed animals solely for their blood, sucking the vital tide from their veins. Before long, I acquired such a perverted taste that I relished in nothing but blood. Warm, reeking blood." Gross. Ugh. I don't love it. I wouldn't be able to sleep that night if I were you, William. I'm telling you that for free. The tale ends with the spirit vanishing suddenly, leaving William alone and speechless, and I'd be pissing my pants. Next, we're going to talk about a vampire from New Orleans. A real-life immortal? You can decide. New Orleans is full of real-life ghost stories, but one of its darkest legends is about a man who never seemed to age. A man who some believed was a real vampire. I was able to go to New Orleans last March, and it was the best trip of my life. It was incredible. Let's dive into the story of Jacques St. Germain. In the early 1900s, a wealthy, well-dressed man named Jacques St. Germain showed up in New Orleans, and he was throwing lavish parties for the city's elite. He was charming, cultured, and spoke of history as if he had lived through it. But something about him seemed a little off. Rumor was that he never ate anything at his own gatherings. He only drank from a glass of deep red liquid. Was it wine? Was it grapes? Or was it as they call it in The Sims, plasma? Things took a dark turn when a woman allegedly fled from his home, screaming that he had tried to bite her neck. It's pretty vampire-y to me. Some said that she even leapt from a balcony to escape, and when police arrived at his house after the incident, he had mysteriously disappeared. Inside his abandoned home, officers reportedly found strange bottles of red liquid, possibly human blood. Now here's where things get really strange. A man named Count Saint Germain lived in 18th century France and was rumored to be immortal. He never seemed to age, spoke of historical events as if he had witnessed them them firsthand, and some believe he dabbled in alchemy or something potentially darker. Could the Jacques St of New Orleans be the same man centuries later? Some locals have claimed to see a strange man walking the French Quarter at night, never aging, but always watching. Others believe that Saint Germain's story is nothing more than a myth. But New Orleans is known for its vampires. Let me also tell you some things that we do know. There are no official records proving that a man named Jacques St. lived in New Orleans in this time frame. There are also no official documents or police records surrounding the escape of the woman from Jacques St. or the bottles of blood. The Count of Saint Germain was a real historical figure, well documented in European history. The idea that he reappeared in New Orleans, obviously there's no evidence for that. Regardless of what the truth is, his mysterious reputation continues to inspire vampire myths and stories to this day. I like to think maybe it was real, so what do you think? Could there be a real vampire hiding in New Orleans history? Or is this just another spooky legend that's grown over time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Next, we're going to talk about the Carter brothers of New Orleans, and this really happened. In 1932, a young girl was stopped by a police officer. She had been running down Royal Street, visibly panicked, but her story sounded pretty far-fetched. She told the police that she had been tied up by two brothers, along with several other victims, and held captive so the brothers could drink their blood. She also said the only reason she was able to escape was because the brothers were so careless in securing her ropes. The police officer agrees to follow the girl back to the home so he can investigate. The home being on the corner of Royal and St. Anne. The home was owned by the Carter brothers, and the police were horrified at what they found. It was just like the girl had said. There were 4 other victims tied to chairs and half unalive. They all had wrists wrapped with bandages, moist and stained with blood. The apartment also smelled foul, and the officers did find 2 other bodies wrapped up in another room that were... The brothers apparently left early each morning before daybreak and returned every evening just after dark. They would then take the bandages off of their victims' wrists, use a knife, reopening the wounds until the red liquid flowed freely, and they would catch that red liquid in cups, which they would then drink. The brothers would then redress the victims' wrists. The victims told police that the brothers rarely spoke and definitely gave no concern for the victims' well-being. The victims knew that to these brothers, they were only a food source. This all happened during the day. That evening, John and Wayne Carter returned to their apartment, unaware that this young girl had escaped. However, the police were waiting for their return. They were quickly apprehended and immediately confessed to the police. They actually begged that the police unalive them. They explained that they were in fact vampires, and if released, would have no option but to continue to unalive people. Their need for drinking red liquid was beyond their control. The brothers were tried as serial killers and eventually executed. It also seems like the Carter brothers had been doing this for a long time, so why did they suddenly get caught? In the 1900s and roaring 20s, New Orleans was the place to be. It was bustling and booming. There were plenty of jobs. It was coined the Big Easy. Businesses were flourishing. There was a surplus of disposable income, and it was a time of anything goes, causing carelessness amongst the residents and people who visited New Orleans. No one was thinking of danger, so if vampires were around, they had a pretty easy pick. But just a decade later came the Great Depression, and basically everything changed almost overnight. People started staying home and keeping to themselves. Perhaps this made it more difficult for the Carter brothers to find their victims, and inherently led to their demise. Were these two people who thought they were real vampires, or were these real vampires? Next, we're going to talk about the Serbian Vampire Epidemic. In the 18th century, an entire region in Serbia was gripped with fear. People were dying mysteriously, graves were being dug up, and government officials were documenting what they believed to be real vampires. This wasn't just folklore. This was an event that sparked Europe's first official vampire hysteria. Let's talk about what really happened. The first recorded recorded vampire case comes from Kisijevo, Serbia in 1725. A man named Petar Blagojevich died suddenly, and within days, at least 9 villagers followed, dying mysteriously after claiming Petar had visited them at night and strangled them while they slept. Terrified, the villagers dug up his grave, and what they found shocked them. His body was well preserved, his hair and nails had grown, which at the time they were not expecting, and worst of all, his mouth was stained with fresh blood. Panicked, they did what legends told them was the only way to stop a vampire. They drove a wooden stake through his heart and burned his remains. This case is documented in Austrian government reports, making it one of the first officially recorded vampire hunts. Medical science suggests today, though, that blood in the mouth was likely due to natural decomposition. But if you thought that was bad, wait until you hear about Arnold Paule. This case was so extreme that it led to official military investigation. Arnold was a Serbian soldier, and before his accidental death, claimed that he had been attacked by a vampire. To cure himself, he allegedly ate dirt from the vampire's grave and smeared himself with the vampire's blood. But after he died, the deaths started again. Villagers claimed to see Arnold's ghostly figure lurking at night. And soon after, more people started dying. Just like Petar, when his body was exhumed, it was found perfectly preserved, with blood dripping from his mouth. This caused the vampire panic to spread. Arnold's case sent Europe into a frenzy. Reports of real vampires spread like wildfire, and soon graves across Serbia were being exhumed, with bodies staked and burned before they could rise again. Austrian officials started treating vampire cases like a public health crisis. Exhumations were no longer the work of terrified villagers, but of military personnel and government officials. These are real documented events that happened, but fear definitely played a huge role. And historians believe that these vampire hunts were responses to outbreaks of disease, like tuberculosis, in which people passed away mysteriously. Even though these vampire panics happened centuries ago, the legend never really went away. In 2012, in the Serbian village of Zarozja, which was not that long ago, locals panicked after an abandoned mill collapsed, a place that was rumored to be the home of a vampire named Sava Savanovic. The town issued an official warning advising people to carry garlic and place crosses over their doors, just in case. This case is real. The government actually acknowledged the threat, but it might have been done more so out of cultural tradition rather than an actual belief in vampires. So were these vampires real or misunderstood cases of disease and decomposition? Serbia's vampire epidemic left a lasting impression on folklore, history, and even modern culture. Make sure you stick around because later we're going to be talking about modern instances of exhumed graves believed to be vampires, the Highgate vampire, and the Croglan Grange vampire. If I pronounced anything wrong in this video, please don't come for me. I did my best. I looked up how to pronounce everything. Sometimes it might have made it worse. So I'm sorry if I did mispronounce anything. You can tell me what that I did, but just don't come for me. If you like vampires, folklore, cryptids, the paranormal, horror, make sure you're following me and check out my Patreon if you're interested in hanging out and taking part in paranormal and folklore research. Anyways, that's it for this one. See you next time.